You don't talk just to talk. You don't fill silence to soothe your own discomfort. You've trained yourself to stay still while the rest of the world scrambles to be seen, to be liked, to be heard. You observe before you respond. You don't chase noise. You sit in the quiet and gather truth. That alone makes you different. Because in a world where everybody wants to be loud, it's the one who thinks deeply who becomes the most powerful. Your silence is never empty. It's working, listening, sensing. And people don't understand that about you. They misread your calm for indifference. They assume your quiet is hesitation. But they're wrong. You're not slow. You're deliberate. You don't shoot before aiming. You don't speak before you've calculated the full cost of your words. You don't need to prove your intelligence with volume. Your power has never been in how much you say. It's in what you choose not to. People feel your presence without you forcing it. You walk into a room and the energy shifts, not because you demand attention, but because your energy is so still, it forces everyone else to face their chaos. You're not rattled easily. You don't fidget with your hands or try to fill every space with noise. You're steady, grounded, and that makes you dangerous in the best way. Most people react. You reflect. They're driven by impulse, emotion, external noise. You've learned how to pause. You've trained yourself to sit with the discomfort and examine it before you respond. That doesn't mean you don't feel things. It means you've mastered your reaction to them. And that's where your rare personality shows up. In the control you hold. In the emotional regulation that took years to build. You've learned how to take a breath, assess the moment, and then respond in a way that doesn't just protect your peace, but pierces through the noise. There are times you feel like you don't fit in, not because you can't, but because you won't pretend. You won't engage in surface level talk just to blend in. You're not good at faking smiles when something feels off. Your instincts don't allow it. You read energy, body language, tone. You sense the shift before anyone else notices, and when others are distracted by words, you're picking up what's really being said. It's not mind reading. It's pattern reading. It's depth perception. It's a radar you've developed from being in spaces where silence protected you more than any sentence ever could. You've likely been misunderstood. People have accused you of being too distant, too intense, too cold. But that's because they can't decode you, and most people fear what they can't understand. You've stopped trying to explain yourself to those who are committed to misreading you. You've realized that your depth will never make sense to someone who's terrified of their own, and that's okay. You weren't built to be widely understood. You were built to be deeply respected. You're the type who listens to what someone says once and remembers it forever. You track behavior. You notice what changes. You recognize when something doesn't align. That level of attention. That's not normal. That's not common. That's rare. And it makes people nervous. Because they know, even if they won't admit it, that you're not easy to fool. You don't fall for performance. You wait. You let people reveal themselves. And they always do. You don't chase attention because you don't need it. You've made peace with your own company. You've spent enough time in solitude to know what your own voice sounds like. That's why you're not shaken by opinion or pressured by trends. You think for yourself. You question everything. You don't follow blindly, you analyze. And when you finally speak, your words cut through the fog like a blade. Not because they're loud, but because they're earned. You speak from precision, not impulse. From clarity, not chaos. And that makes you one of the rarest people in any room you walk into. Because rare personalities aren't the ones who take up the most space. They're the ones who hold the most power in the least amount of noise. And that's exactly who you are. You feel deeply. But the world never sees the storm. And that's what makes you rare. Most people wear their emotions on their face. They react in real time. They explode, they break, and then they apologize. But you hold the line. Not because you're cold, but because you've learned the cost of emotional recklessness. You've been in rooms where being emotional got you manipulated. You've sat across from people who twisted your honesty into weakness. So now, you guard yourself. You feel everything, but you release nothing until you choose to. That is emotional discipline. That is strength. And it doesn't come naturally. You had to earn it. Through pain, through disappointment, through betrayal. You've been in situations where you let your heart lead, and you got burned for it. You learn the hard way that not everyone deserves access to your vulnerability. So now, when something stings, you sit with it. You don't post it, you don't vent it, you don't seek validation. You deal with it internally. You process before reacting. That's rare, because the world trains people to be reactive. You trained yourself to respond with intention. You've felt rage and said nothing. You've been insulted and kept your composure. Not because it didn't hurt, but because you've mastered your instincts. You don't let the world pull you out of your character. And people notice it, even if they don't admit it. They try to provoke you. They want to see if they can get under your skin. But you've built armor out of experience. You know that true control isn't about dominating others. It's about controlling yourself. You don't flinch. You don't engage in chaos. You stay poised when everything else is falling apart. That's power most people never develop. You don't deny your emotions. You just own them. You're self-aware. You know when you're angry, sad, tired, anxious. But you don't project it on people. You take responsibility for your state, and that is rare, because the average person walks around expecting the world to adjust to their mood. You've decided that your power lies in discipline, not disorder. So when life punches you, you take the hit, but you don't lash out, you breathe. You assess, you adapt. Then you move forward without leaving a trail of destruction behind you. This kind of emotional control confuses people. They think you're unbothered. They assume you don't feel. What they don't understand is that you feel more than most. That's exactly why you had to get a grip on it. Because unchecked emotion leads to chaos. You don't suppress it. You manage it. There's a difference. You know how to identify your triggers. You've studied your reactions. You know what sets you off, and you've built mental structures to keep yourself grounded when things get intense. That's not natural. That's trained behavior. That's the result of doing the internal work no one talks about. You're not emotionally numb. You're emotionally intelligent. You recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you through guilt, urgency, flattery, or silence. You don't bite the bait. You don't fall for emotional games. People can cry, scream, guilt trip, or disappear, and you still hold your ground. Not because you're heartless, but because you know your worth. You've learned that someone else's emotional chaos is not your responsibility to fix. That's a hard boundary you had to build after years of being used, blamed, or drained. And when you speak, you do so from a place of clarity. You don't raise your voice. You don't lose control. You use words like a scalpel, not a weapon. You don't argue to win. You communicate to understand. You ask direct questions. You don't get swept up in emotional spirals. You dissect the situation. You keep the facts in front of you and the drama out of the way. That unnerves people who thrive on emotional confusion. Because you can stay calm while they try to create chaos. That makes you the one with the upper hand. When you leave a conversation, you don't feel drained. Because you didn't give away your peace. You didn't allow your emotions to hijack your dignity. You stood tall. You kept your voice steady. You kept your face calm. And whether people liked it or not, you earned their respect. Not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it through discipline. That's emotional control. That's emotional intelligence. And that's why your personality stands out in a world that's addicted to emotional explosions. You intimidate people without even trying. And it's not because you're aggressive, loud, or boastful. It's because your energy speaks before your words ever do. You walk into a room and don't seek validation. You don't try to fit in, you observe. You measure the space. You listen before you speak. You stand still while others fidget. And that presence, it unsettles people who are used to noise, who are used to dominance being loud. You don't need to perform, because your silence is already doing the talking. That's the mark of someone who has nothing to prove. What people don't realize is that being intimidating isn't about trying to be feared. It's about embodying a level of confidence and stillness that most people haven't developed in themselves. You know who you are. You don't overshare. You don't overexplain. You don't beg for acceptance. You move with certainty. That doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from doing the hard work on yourself, on your past, on your pain. You've had to rebuild yourself in silence, so now you carry yourself like someone who doesn't crumble under pressure. And people feel that. They don't know why, but they feel it. You've walked away from disrespect without making a scene. You've said no without guilt. You've set boundaries without needing to defend them. That makes people uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because you're doing something they don't have the courage to do. You're not afraid to be disliked. You're not afraid of being misunderstood. You've stopped trying to be relatable and started focusing on being real. And when someone sees that level of clarity in another human being, it shakes them. Because it shows them everything they're not willing to be yet. You don't chase. You don't convince. You don't manipulate. You simply state what you require, and you watch who respects it. That's power. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard, because your presence alone demands attention. Not because you want the spotlight, but because you've built yourself to be unshakable in a world that rewards performance over substance. You're not concerned with being liked. You're focused on being aligned. You walk away the moment your peace is threatened. And people call that cold. But it's clarity. You intimidate people because they can't figure you out. You don't broadcast your next move. You're not predictable. You're not constantly uploading your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions. You move in silence. You let your actions reveal your values. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You've learned that the most dangerous people are usually the quietest in the room. And you're not dangerous in a destructive way. You're dangerous because you're unbothered. Because you've stopped giving your power away to people who haven't earned it. Your aura, your focus, your unshakable sense of self. It makes people examine themselves. It holds up a mirror, and most don't like what they see. That's why you get labeled as too much, or too intense, or too serious, because your existence demands that others level up, and not everyone is ready for that. You've trained your mind. You've conditioned your emotions. You've learned to move through chaos without reacting to it. You can take a hit, absorb it, and keep going. That kind of resilience can't be faked. It's felt. People test you not because they see weakness, but because they want to know where your limit is. And when they realize you don't bend easily, that you won't compromise your values for comfort, for affection, for attention, they either try to discredit you or they fall back. That's the price of standing in your power. You will lose people, but you won't lose yourself. And that's the difference between someone who is chasing approval and someone who is walking in truth. You aren't someone who tries to dominate the space. You just know how to own it. You don't interrupt. You don't compete. You're not there to impress. You're there to observe, to learn, to calculate. And when you finally do speak, it's intentional. It's sharp. It's impactful. That makes people remember you. Not because you demanded attention, but because you carried yourself with such quiet authority. They couldn't ignore you even if they tried. That's what makes you rare in a world where most are screaming to be seen. You think for yourself. And that alone makes you rare. In a world where people follow trends without question, where opinions are recycled from headlines and beliefs are borrowed from influencers, you dare to question everything. You don't just accept what you're told. You investigate. You reflect. You examine the root, not just the surface. You don't just look at what everyone is doing. You ask why. And then you ask if it aligns with your values. You aren't quick to react. You pause. You analyze. And that frustrates people who expect blind obedience, who want you to follow the crowd because it's safer, easier, quieter. When you think for yourself, you become a threat to people who are used to controlling narratives. You don't absorb energy blindly. You filter it. You understand that not every opinion deserves your attention, and not every voice deserves a platform in your mind. You've developed internal filters that reject manipulation, emotional blackmail, and the pressure to conform. You're not dismissive, you're discerning. You take your time before you accept anything. You gather information, you watch patterns, you study behavior. People don't realize how deeply you process things because you don't need to make noise while doing it. Most people look for answers outside of themselves. You look within. You've realized that clarity doesn't come from validation. It comes from stillness, from self-inquiry, from sitting with uncomfortable truths until they stop controlling you. That's why you don't get easily influenced. You've spent time alone with your thoughts. You've faced your shadows. You've questioned your own biases. You've unlearned what no longer served you. That's what gives you depth. That's what gives you clarity. And clarity is dangerous in a world that thrives on confusion and chaos. When you speak, it's not just noise, it's reflection. Your words are measured, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you value truth over performance. You'd rather be silent than dishonest. You'd rather be alone than misaligned. You don't rush to give your opinion because you understand the weight of words. You've seen how language can be used to deceive, to flatter, to manipulate. You've chosen to use it as a tool, not as a mask. And when you speak with that kind of integrity, people listen, even if they pretend not to. Thinking for yourself means standing alone sometimes. It means choosing the unpopular opinion. It means walking away when everyone else stays. It means refusing to compromise your truth just to keep the peace. And that kind of strength, most people don't have it. They call it stubbornness. They call it arrogance. But deep down, they envy it, because it shows them how much they've given away for the sake of acceptance. When you think for yourself, you're no longer controlled by approval. You're driven by alignment. That scares people who live their lives addicted to external validation. You don't jump on emotional bandwagons. You don't panic when the world tells you to fear. You've trained your mind to respond instead of react. That makes you grounded in storms. While others spiral, you strategize. While others explode, you exhale. That calm, that internal authority, it makes people uncomfortable. Because they're used to others echoing their chaos and you refuse to participate. You can hold your own thoughts, even when they contradict the noise around you. And that's rare. Most people just want to be loud. You want to be right. Not for ego, for principle. You've stopped outsourcing your identity. You don't let likes define your worth. You don't let trends dictate your direction. You don't let pressure hijack your voice. You think for yourself, and that means you have power that can't be bought, coerced, or manipulated. You know how to spot truth in a world of deception. You know how to walk away when something doesn't feel right. You don't care who disagrees. You care whether your decisions honor the person you're becoming. And that internal compass, it's rare, it's resilient, and it's rooted in something bigger than approval. You don't try to fit in. You never did. Even when you were younger, you always felt like something was different. Not wrong, just different. You didn't laugh when everyone laughed. You didn't agree just to keep the peace. You didn't pretend to like what you didn't. And while the world tried to box you in, label you, shape you into something more palatable, you resisted. Not loudly, not with rebellion, but with quiet, unwavering refusal. You didn't need attention, you just needed authenticity. You didn't crave popularity, you craved truth. That alone makes you rare, because most people will abandon themselves just to be liked. There's nothing normal about someone who refuses to dilute themselves for acceptance. That's what makes you dangerous, because you can walk into a room and not seek validation. You don't scan the crowd for permission. You don't shrink when people don't understand you. You've learned how to be misunderstood and not take it personally. Because you finally figured it out. It's not your job to make people comfortable with who you are. It's your job to be who you are, regardless of how they feel. You don't modify your essence to match the setting. You walk in with your full self, even if it makes others uneasy. Especially if it makes others uneasy. You see through the game. You know what's real and what's performance. You've studied human nature long enough to recognize the masks people wear, and you don't waste your energy trying to expose them. You just refuse to wear one yourself. That's what sets you apart. You know that fitting in often means betraying yourself, and you've chosen self-loyalty. Even when it's isolating. Even when it's quiet. Even when it means walking alone. You don't fear solitude, you respect it. Because that solitude built you. It taught you how to be solid when no one clapped for you. It taught you how to lead yourself when no one offered a hand. It taught you how to sit with your silence and mine it for wisdom, not noise. You've stopped explaining yourself. You've stopped justifying your preferences, your standards, your boundaries. You don't waste time giving people roadmaps to understand you. If they get it, they get it. If they don't, that's fine too. You're not here to be decoded. You're not a puzzle. You're a force. And not everyone will know how to deal with that. But that doesn't mean you soften your edges or water down your intensity. You've spent years earning that clarity, and now you protect it. Not out of arrogance, but out of respect. For yourself, your time, and your energy. What makes you rare isn't that you're unique. Everyone is unique. What makes you rare is that you honor it. You live it. You don't bury it under layers of approval, seeking, or cultural conditioning. You've chosen to be the version of yourself that feels most true, even if it's the version people least understand. And you know what? That takes courage. It's easy to wear the costume. It's easy to play the role. It's easy to follow the script. But it's rare to say, This is who I am. And then show up that way every day without apology. You've stopped waiting for belonging. You realize that real belonging only happens when you don't have to perform. When you can show up as yourself and still be embraced. And if you can't find that, you're willing to walk away. That's rare, because most people would rather be accepted than be free. You've chosen freedom. Even if it means fewer people understand you. Even if it means you're not everyone's favorite. You'd rather be respected than liked. You'd rather be true than trendy. You'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by people who only love your mask. You walk through life with an inner fire that doesn't beg to be seen, but can't be ignored. You know who you are, and you no longer apologize for it. That makes you unshakable. Because people can sense when someone has made peace with their identity. They can't control you. They can't manipulate you. They can't scare you into conformity. That's the power of not trying to fit in. You become the standard. You become the one others look to, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it through authenticity, resilience, and truth. You don't follow trends because your compass points inward, not outward. While the world is busy obsessing over who's watching, who's clapping, who's trending, you're building something deeper. Quietly, deliberately, you're not chasing noise. You're chasing meaning. That's what makes you rare. You don't need the latest slogan to know what you believe. You don't shift your stance based on likes, applause, or groupthink. You think for yourself. That alone separates you from the crowd, because thinking independently in a world designed to mold you into a copy is radical. You see what most people miss. The trend is temporary, but your truth has to last. When something becomes popular, your instinct isn't to jump in. It's to pause, to question, to observe. You ask, what's behind this? What's the real message? Because you've trained your mind not to react but to assess. That's how rare personalities operate. You don't absorb the world blindly. You interrogate it. You don't repost every quote you see. You filter. You analyze. You only align with what actually reflects your values, not what will make you look good. You've learned that standing out often requires you to stand alone, and you're okay with that. You've been through enough to know that following the crowd can cost you your voice.